Hey everybody, welcome to my next aggregate demand, aggregate supply video, and I'm just going to show how this model can become a little bit more realistic without actually changing any of its intuition. So normally, if we talk about a negative demand shock, we have a graph like this, and then we have demand decrease, and because of that, we're in this recessionary gap and wages will eventually fall, so that your short-run aggregate supply rises as wages fall, and you wind up down here. That's the standard picture for a negative demand shock. Now, there's a problem with it, a big one, which is that this model is predicting for us that the price level is going to fall every time we have a recession, or at least every time we have a negative demand shock. And in the United States, though, deflation is pretty rare. Though, for instance, the last time we had a recession with a year of inflation was in the 1930s in the Great Depression. It's been almost 100 years since we've had a year of deflation. And this model predicts that it happens every time that there's a demand shock. Sorry, every time there's a negative demand shock. So we need to figure out a way to use this model a little more realistically, maybe. And I'm just going to hint at it because I don't really emphasize it in my classes enough, but it's something to think about. Reality check. Your long-run aggregate supply curve is almost always increasing. It is not standing still. When we draw this graph, we leave LRAS there as if it doesn't move. But the truth is it's almost always moving. Why? Because population is growing, because we're getting more capital than before, because technology is constantly improving. That long-run aggregate supply curve is always on the move, and it's almost always moving to the right. At the same time, aggregate demand is almost always rising too. As we have economic growth, our income rises, and so we spend more money. You see, this model isn't just business cycle. When you throw growth into it, there's a lot more moving pieces. So for instance, I could have this original long-run aggregate supply curve and a model in equilibrium at point A. And then I could say a year later, it looks like this, with a new long-run aggregate supply curve, a new short-run aggregate supply curve, a new aggregate demand curve, and a new equilibrium. And it's not hard to imagine if I shifted AD2 to the left or right, or if I shifted SRAS2 to the left or right, I could really mess with the price level. I could model this to show prices increasing or decreasing. I could show it, so by that I could say there's inflation or deflation during this time period. And so I'm not trying to tell you exactly how you need to do it. I'm just trying to point out that once we say there's growth, that means everything is constantly moving, and that leaves the model a lot more flexible. Last thing I want to do, I want to reintroduce how inflation might occur. How does it usually work? Well, in this dynamic framework, all we would need to say is that your aggregate demand increases more than short-run aggregate supply. And so if we were to have that long-run aggregate supply curve and a new one for afterwards, and at the original we might have an equilibrium that looks like that, and at the new one we have this big increase in aggregate demand and a smaller increase in aggregate supply, and the effect is that the price level rises. And like I said, we can draw this many ways. I can have aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply decrease during a recession. I can have them being roughly still while our long-run supply curve moves. I can make there be more inflation or less inflation. I'm not going to get into a lot of the crazy details. I just wanted to help you see that this picture, although it's a good starting point, is just that, a starting point. And even this one, or this one, is still mostly just a starting point, but it's a slightly more realistic one that accounts for growth and short-run fluctuations at the same time. And that makes it more difficult to analyze, but it also means that if you can work through this model, you can represent more of reality with it. So, I hope that's helpful. If not, Too bad. Thanks for watching, guys. Good luck.
And happy econing.